Actually help me because I don't really.
You have to catch me when I'm off guard.
Yeah,
and then you just start talking.
Yeah, so I know nothing about this. You just said like make sure that it's not turning off.
All right.
Yeah, what do you think?
Let me just see here. Here, Michael, let's just do this here.
See?
Yeah, we got several.
I got you.
Who are like professionals.
Professionals, yeah. I'm kind of like, you know, Michael, I'm not a professional. Like, where's the button?
I want to go. I just want to go a little bit tighter though. So whatever you see.
Well, I'm going to be doing some stuff over here.
When he comes sit here, we need to see
Oh,
him here too.
all right. So all right.
But first here.
I think
then
wide is fine too.
Okay.
All right, you guys ready? How is Ruby going, guys?
Yay!
Good. Okay.
What's your favorite
Great.
song?
I feel like you guys are feeling much better yesterday and today than last week. So that's great. Okay, so today we're going to talk about Rails a little bit more. But before we go on, I want to do some review on what we talked about. So we're just going to do some high level. Okay, give me some class participation. So some quizzes. What's a resource that we talked about? What is a resource?
Objects, photos.
Okay.
Anything that can be created, destroyed,
anything like
updated.
Yeah.
I'm like, I know.
Sessions, users, messages, comments.
Those are examples. Well, what is it, and why do we need it? How do you define a resource?
Isn't it just data? I mean,
it's basically usually a table in the database, and it's in your model. And when you like go to the thing, the routes file will send you to that controller, which will pull from the model and look into the database. So usually it'd be like a user table in a database, and then you manipulate the user table in like a CRUD fashion. So create, read, update, destroy.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So
anything you can create, read, update, destroy.
So it's a.
yeah,
I don't know.
that's
I don't
my
want to say that.
answer.
Say it. It helps me to see. You know, I
Say it again, Miles.
It's as Gigi said. It's like, it's like objects that contain the data, and it's related, it's connected, and where the 7 methods can act on. Yes.
Okay.
Would it be updating
I feel
table?
like so.
Okay. I'm seeing a lot of gaps. This is great. It means there are things that we can bridge. Okay, so try again. I want something better than what we have here for. Ian, do you want to take a stab at it? What's a resource? And this could be like a technical interview, right? What is a resource? What's a model? What's a Restful architecture? You got to be able to explain it. If you are really understanding something, you should be able to explain it. Right? So that. Okay. Yeah. Try again. Resource. What is that?
Objects you can use in your application?
Objects you can use in your application? No.
Anything you can create, update, read, destroy.
It's something that you can create, destroy, update, all that stuff. That's considered a resource. And this is what usually is tied with. Is it tied with model, view, or controller? Or none of the above? Models, right? And why models? Yeah, because model is the one that handles the database, and database stores information, right? And different records in the database can be inserted, created, destroyed, updated, right? So it's very logical for a resource to be contained in the database. Does that make sense? Okay. So now, someone explain to me what RESTful architecture is. What does that mean? Like that means full of rest. Peace.
It's a standard.
Okay, it's a standard.
A standard of methods that you would use on your resources.
Okay, pretty close. It's about 40% there.
Standard URL structure that is tied to actions.
Standard URL structure. Yeah, I like that.
40%.
Okay, about 80%. Pretty close. Or maybe even close to 100. Okay, I think that's good enough. I'll accept that. Standard URL structure. For what?
For performing the common actions on your database.
I like that.
For
Yeah.
CRUD.
For CRUD.
Creed. Okay, so how many are there? 7 URL structures. How many are get?
4.
4. And what are they?
Index,
Show.
new, show, edit.
You're too easy. Don't look at your notes.
Well, you know what? You're asking questions and I'm answering them.
But I want you to
Take it or leave it.
Coming out of like your head. Just I mean, I don't care if you don't get it
All
right,
right, well,
because again, the goal is for us to just understand. Right? That's why we're doing a review. Right? Okay.
Yeah, Michael knows the
So-
answers to these questions.
what's that again?
Michael already knows the answers to these questions.
Well, I do too. So I can't use my notes.
All right. So there are 4 get methods, and what are they?
I forget.
Show.
Uh,
New.
Well, you're talking to me about the URL. Well, about the method. Don't tell me about the method. Tell me the URL structure. You said it's a URL structure. So what are the 4? How are they structured?
well,
Slash new.
there's
Index is the first.
Slash one.
Just one slash or one.
Okay, so one is like slash.
Just
So let's say the resource that we're going to do is photos, because that's what we
Okay.
did.
slash web.
And usually, when we do the URL, we make it plural, right?
Mhm.
Because how many resources are we going to have? Just one?
One.
We don't have
Multiple.
multiple, right? So it makes sense in the URL for it to be plural. It makes sense for the controller's name to be plural. Okay? So we'll do photos. So one is what?
Slash photos.
That's one. What's another one? Photos, I heard one. What are some other?
You can say
Photos /1/edit.
Photos /1/edit. Okay, great.
Photos slash new.
New.
Photos slash new.
New. Okay, someone explain to me what the first one is. What is that?
All.
Show.
Display
Show.
all the
display the
Display all the
information.
photos. This one, photos 1.
Display photo
The
one.
first photo.
Display photo 1. This one.
Display
Give me a
the
form.
that you can edit the first photo.
All right, that's awesome. This.
display the form to create a new form.
Okay, all right. So brainwash succeeded. Good job. You guys did it. All right, what are the other 3? What are the other 3?
Post to photos.
We got
All right.
create, update, destroy. They're all posts.
And what's the URL structure? And again, you will. I just want to like go over and over again so that like you're like okay, easy, because when you do Rails, like this will just have to be part of like your brain. Okay. Post. Where do we post the? What's the URL for post?
Photos.
Photos.
/photos. Put. What does put mean?
Update.
Okay. Where does that go?
It's photos slash whatever number, number 1.
Delete.
The exact same,
One.
whatever, yeah, photos 1.
Okay. Makes sense? So, okay, now we have a controller. We're going to create a controller called photos. So in our simple examples, the name of the resource will appear in our model, and the name of that resource will appear in our controller. But that's because we're just doing some simple examples. Later on, the controller doesn't have to be the name of the resource. Can you think of some examples where the controller may not be the name of the resource?
Yeah. Like, let's say maybe you want to have a main controller, maybe, and then you're handling users, for example. That might be
Okay.
something different.
Okay. So a good example is think about like a dashboard. Okay. And the dashboard allows you to handle things for multiple resources. You're not just displaying information for like photos or users or whatnot. You have multiple resources, right? So imagine a dashboard page, and you have all this AJAX stuff happening. So the dashboard page is going to make certain requests to different controllers to say, hey, display the user information here for this AJAX form. Display this, for the photos from the photo controller and so forth, right? So you can imagine that right now, it kind of makes sense like this, but it doesn't always have to, the name of the controller and the name of the model doesn't always have to match, okay? But it's usually a good idea if you have a model to have a controller for it. Because if you have a resource, most likely you will be creating something, destroying it, and updating and stuff like that. Okay, so let's think of that example. I'm trying to get you guys to think in the next level. So let's say we have an admin dashboard, and here, this manages multiple resources. So let's say photos, admins, okay, blogs, whatever. Tons of stuff. Okay? Would I need a page? Would I want to have a page that displays all the photos of every single person in my system? Maybe I don't. So then, I may say, hey, but would I need a photo? I mean, would it make sense to have like a photo resource where I can like create, update, and destroy that? That makes sense, right? So I would have that in the model. I'll probably have a controller too, because I'm going to use that controller, the different URL structure, to create, update, all that stuff. But for that photos, it may not make sense for me to have this method, right, in the controller, because maybe I don't want anyone to access all of this. Maybe I don't even want anyone to access this. Does that make sense? So it always makes sense when you have a resource to have a controller named after that, but sometimes you don't need all of the different stuff. And sometimes you don't even have it display the HTML, because maybe the photos, I just needed to handle some data and spit out a JSON data, right? I don't need to spit out any HTML, I just needed to spit out JSON data. Does that make sense? Okay, did I lose people there? Why would I want to do that? Well, maybe I just don't need these pages. I just needed to create a new photo, edit a new photo, destroy it, update it, but that's it. I don't need any front end to it. Does that make sense? So I would only have JSON stuff. And that's an API right there. Right? I can post information to different URLs still through the Restful architecture, and I can retrieve information back as JSON. And in the admin controller, you can go and get the data, and just like the normal AJAX jQuery stuff, get the data, parse it, display it on your web page. Okay, make sense? So all of you know how to create APIs. It's really easy to do that using Rails or PHP or any framework. It's just basically form handling. That's all it is, APIs. Okay? All right. I think I lost some people. No? No? Make sense? What was confusing about this? I feel like everyone's like, oh man, I get Rails, and then as soon as I did this thing, you're like, okay, maybe no.
A little bit confused on resources and controllers, like why you don't always need a controller for a resource.
Yeah. Maybe just believe me that sometimes you don't. But in most cases, you will have a controller and a model with the name of the resource. Okay, but sometimes it just doesn't make sense to have a controller that handles that model, right? Because we're thinking one-to-one relationship here. We're thinking, if you have a resource, create a controller with that resource. Create a model, with that resource. Maybe I don't even need this controller. Maybe I have a single controller that accesses 3 different models. Who says that in one controller can only have one model? In your MVC framework, does one controller can only have one model? Does it usually just work with one model? Usually. But is that the case all the time? Not the case all the time. Especially as the web application gets more complicated. When do you update or do things with just one database table? A lot of times that's the case, but sometimes you don't. You have things that are happening with multiple databases. What does that mean? You need a single controller and method that handles multiple models, right? And maybe one model, you don't need a controller for it, right? Maybe all the purpose for that model is to provide some support role for different controllers. And maybe you don't even need the URL structure for that model, because you don't want anyone to touch that resource using the URL. Okay, so think of it this way. The reason we want to create the Restful architecture is because we want to provide a way for users to modify that resource through the URL structure. Do we want people to do that all the time? Do we want people to update the resource using the URL structure all the time? Not all the time. But if you do want to, use URL structure to modify the resource. Then we use the RESTful architecture, and it automatically creates these methods and different controllers to make it easy for you to manage that resource using the URL structure. Right? But if you don't need someone to access that resource through the URL, then you don't have the RESTful architecture. You don't even have a controller for that. You just have the model. Does that make sense? Okay. Okay. I think one of my philosophy, and at least right now, is teach make the course seem like it's so simple that everyone's like, oh my goodness, this is so simple. And then once I build enough confidence, like throw something to like humble you a little bit and to like take it to the next level. Because again, there are so many things with Rails. Like things like this, there are like probably hundreds of those things. But again, it's important to have the right level of confidence so that you know you can do it, and also the right level of humility. Okay. All right, does that make sense? Any questions on this? So again, don't if you're thinking, oh, created a resource, create a RESTful architecture, wrong. Only if you want the user to access that resource through the URL. That's when RESTful comes handy. Okay, make sense? Still, I have some confused looks. Okay, it will make a little bit more sense. As you work on more applications, this will make a lot more sense. Okay? A lot of the tutorials you read, you will always see the name of the resource and the name and that appearing in the model. But I don't want you guys to think that's the case all the time. It doesn't have to be. Okay? Alright, so I think I threw some curveball. Now I gotta build you guys back up. Okay. As we have these conversations again and again and again, I think you will feel more comfortable about this. Okay, so I'm gonna ask some of these things tomorrow, and we'll see how you guys respond. Okay, maybe we'll do something a little bit more advanced. Okay, so everything, a lot of things in Rails, we first have to build the models, the database structure, right? And what resource we're going to create. So it's a little bit different. Okay? We create the model. We create, just like when we did a project, we created the ERD. We create the ERD and we put that into the models. Okay? What is exactly a model in Rails? What are the benefits of putting everything into models? Can someone tell me? We talked about those are the key things. Okay. Explain why this is easier. Why is validation easier when you put it in the models? What's the benefit of that? I mean, so far, what we had you do is just have a script language that checks all of the different fields and gives the validation hash, right? In Rails, we just say, hey, make sure these fields are validated or required or whatever, and it just works. What's the benefit? Why do we want to do it this way? Randall?
Because a lot of the validations are similar in the fields that you're validating, so the code is repeated. So it's a lot easier to have the code already there.
Sure. That's right. If you're doing a lot of validation, you imagine writing a lot of if and else statements. Right? Every time that I'm validating something new, I have to add if and else statements. 4 lines of code for every validation. It can get like really messy. So, and are all validations like unique? They're not unique. You do the same type of validation. You see if something is required. You see the the length. You see if it is like certain format. So like, why do we have to write those every single time, right? So they already wrote some rules or methods that we can use that does the validation. Okay. Associations. Can someone explain what that means? What does that mean?
How one table is connected to another table.
Okay.
One to many, many to many.
Okay. And why is that useful?
When you do queries, it can pull stuff from neighboring tables that are associated with each other.
Okay. All right. So let's do an example here. So, okay, so let's just think theoretically. If I said blogs, and I have a resource called blog that explains how this is supposed to look. Okay, and blog has an ID, has a name, description, created at, updated at. Okay. If I say blogs, all, what do you think I'm trying to do? Even if you don't know programming. blogs all.
All
Yeah,
List
get all the blogs.
blogs.
Okay, let's say, okay, so this is what we did, and we talked about blogs.first. What does that mean, blogs.first?
The first record.
Okay, what about blogs.new? Create one. Create.
Create form.
Yeah, create something. Save. Save it.
Update.
Update. Right? It makes sense. It reads like English. But all this is a class, and that's a method. Someone just wrote a method called all. When that method gets called, what do? Go through each record and display it. Right? Okay. So that makes sense. But why is it that when so far, if you haven't done ORM, that you have to do select star from this, join this, join this? Why is that? Doesn't that read the same? I mean, isn't this much simpler? Okay. That's ORM. And you can do this with any language, but you can see the benefit of this, right? Okay, so now let's say blogs has multiple posts. Okay, so it has a blog ID. What do you think I mean when I say blogs? Find one. What do you think this could possibly mean? Blogs, I'll find one post.
List all the posts of the first record.
From log ID 1.
Yep, that's exactly.
What was it? I didn't hear
Yeah,
that.
what would that mean? Blogs, I'll find one post.
We'll find all the posts with the blog ID 1.
Yep. What if I do post last? What do you think that would mean?
Get the last
The last
post.
Yeah, get the last post of the first blog. So couldn't we write some classes to say, hey, let's create these methods and have it return. You guys did the Math Dojo one, right? You guys know how to do all these chain events now, chain methods. You can have it return an instance object of itself, and you can just start creating, like doing chain stuff. Nothing magical about it. It's just OOP, right? And so this is not just Ruby. It's with any language you can do this, right? Okay. What about if I did like post, like destroy all? Delete all the posts. Right? It makes sense, right? So, people wrote different methods, helpers, to make it easy for us to manage a resource so that it sounds more like English. Okay? So, when I did this though, what was the actual query that was being run? What happened on the back end? If you're writing this method, what would you do?
Select all from
Joining posts,
blogs,
blogs.
join post.
Yeah? Select whatever from blogs, join it with a post,
Blog ID.
right? Find the blog ID, and from there, get all the posts, and then get the, order by, all that stuff, right? So the SQL queries you can see, and if you were to write these methods, you should be able to write these SQL methods, right? So that's basically what Rails has done. They did that. They created these different methods to convert this to the actual SQL query, and it works. Okay? All right. But that's pretty cool, right? What if I make, so we'll say B is equal to that, and say for B, post, create information for the post. Did you see how you can, because B already has the blog ID,
I think you should pan back now.
blog is supposed to have post, and create a new one. Create a new post. And this would automatically do insert into post, and automatically get the blog ID from here. Okay, make sense?
Would B is equal blog, would that be uppercase B?
This?
Yeah.
Well, this is just, I'm not using Ruby right now. Well, I'm using Ruby syntaxes, but because this is a name of a class, yeah, it would be capital in Ruby. But we're just trying to do like, without tying it to a specific language. Yeah.
So does the associations that are assigned to the models kind of determine what methods are available to each? So if you have an object representing a single record of a blog, then it would have the posts method
Yeah.
associated with it because you made that association. Is
Yeah.
that right?
So this is implying that this is, you know, a blog has multiple posts,
Right.
right?
Because you
I
specified it
But
somewhere.
if blog is only supposed to have one post, then this should be blog b.post.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they automatically created the method name post or post depending on the condition.
Right.
Okay, does that make sense? All right, so what we're going to do today, we're not going to create a front end, okay? We're not going to, I think we're going to do the front end tomorrow. And you will see how everything comes together, the controllers and the views, okay, and the form. But let's make sure we understand how to do this. So what we want to do today is we're going to create an application. And in this application, sorry, I can't come up with something better. So I'm just going to do something that's very typical, but it's okay. We're going to have users, okay, and we're going to have blogs, and we're going to have posts, okay. And let's create an application that allows us to manage users, manage blogs, and manage posts. So we're going to create a resource for this, put it in the model, and we're going to may use Restful architecture to allow users to manipulate some of these resources through the URL. Okay? So for the user, we're going to have a name, we're going to have birth date, and we're going to have description. Okay? Created at, updated at, all that stuff. Okay? ID, name, description, okay, and user ID. One user can have multiple blogs. One blog can have multiple posts. So this is going to have the blog ID, name, description, ID, and also created at, updated at. Sorry, I don't like to write everything. Okay, and so forth. Okay, so if this was your project, what would you do? What would be the first thing that you do?
Wireframes.
Yeah, wireframe. Don't code. Wireframe it, and then HTML, CSS, and then ERD. You're not going to create your model right away. You're going to have to do ERD. And that's one of the common mistakes that Rails developers do. They're like, oh, that's a model. Let me just go and create the model. Boom, 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 boom. Okay, I don't even care, you know, all the other relationships. Oh, so I created a migration file. And they do, oh, I need another model. Oh, this is a relationship. Let me do that. Boom, 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 boom. Boom, 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 boom. And then they're like, oh, crap, something was wrong with my database structure. I need to go change it. Oh, let me create another migration file that reverses some of this. And like, it's just a nightmare, right? You guys won't make that mistake. Okay, but let's say I did all the ERD, and this is the ERD that has been approved. Everything is good to go. I have my HTML, CSS, it's all good. Okay, then this is what you would do. Okay, so now I'm going to turn on my computer, and we're going to build this. And we're going to build it from scratch.
Oh, the projection.
Yeah, so we can turn the lights off and then just sort of get the.
What?
Did you get another card?
Yeah.
Okay, because this one will take 10 minutes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Do you guys feel like you have better understanding on RESTful architecture? Did I confuse you more about RESTful architecture today?
No.
No?
I like it.
Okay.
I had a question about users accessing the URL structure. Why a resource wouldn't always need to have something in there.
Sometimes you don't want the user to modify that resource using the URL structure. URL structure is only a path for some,
Okay.
right?
That's good.
I just want them to see a summary. So, yeah, think about that a little bit more. All right.
And we're ready, Michael.
I think I just need to plug this in. Oops.
Oh.
The lecture I did yesterday was like 11 gigabytes. Like I was uploading it to YouTube, Greg, and it stopped. At the end, like it took like a few hours, and at the end it said YouTube gave you an error or something.
I've got, I'm stealing it off the fire right now.
All right, you guys can all see that, right?
I mean, I doubt the
I was just joking.
video recorder's going to pick up any of the text in this.
Yeah. It's too small.
Oh, so weird to see yourself in the background.
Oh yeah, let's get that out of the way. Yeah, I'm downloading it now. Exporting it. Okay, the cool ninjas. Okay, so what I'm going to do.
Going closer, Jess?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, I want to create a new project. What do I do?
Those you
And then the name of the project. I'm going to do project 2. Project 2 doesn't sound interesting. Give me a cool name. Huh?
iBlog.
iBlog. Okay. Rails new iBlog. So it got everything for me. It's running bundle install. Yeah, all these like little things, like we're going to spend time talking about it. I'm going to spend time talking about bundle install. What the heck? Fetching gem metadata, please.
Maybe you need a pseudo.
We'll be able to, you know.
Sometimes we bundle them.
Yeah.
Or gem install.
Okay.
No, it doesn't need it.
Hold on.
It's just taking gems that already exist and like including them in the Rails project. So it doesn't need any global right permission. If you were to do gem install something, then you would need it.
Okay.
Though it could be, but unlikely, that he doesn't have the default gems necessary for a Rails project.
Then it would try to install those and then need permission.
Maybe, yeah.
Okay, so we created a project. Okay, so let's go ahead and create our models. How would I create? Okay, so I deleted the database, but database structure. But you have it in your head, right? I'm gonna have users, logs, and post. So let's create those 3 models. What would I do?
Rails generator.
Oops. Can you guys see this? Should I make it bigger?
Yeah, that'd be kind of, if you make the font size a little bigger, it look,
All right, this is really big. Okay. Rails, generate, model.
Gee, I like that.
Name of model. That's a lot better. I've never been able to see those
The
things
font?
you've been typing since the beginning.
Make it a little bigger for you.
You should have said something.
Yeah, sorry, dude.
No, that's okay. I suspect a lot of people can't see that.
Yeah.
They just don't say it.
Okay, so Rails G model, generate model. You can type it if you all want. Maybe in the beginning you can type it and until you feel pain and you just do Rails G model. Okay, and then what do I do?
Capital user.
User, singular,
Singular.
right? Okay, and then what? I need name, description, and birth date.
Name, colon, text.
Name, string, description, string,
Okay.
birth date, date. Yeah, it just did a bunch of stuff. It created a model for me. And it created this migration file, which I'm not going to talk about because I'm going to talk about that more, I think, tomorrow. Okay, but it created something for me. Okay, let's create the blog. How do I create the blog? A lot of repetition, and hopefully it will just become natural.
G model.
Okay,
Capital D, LOG.
blog. I want name, description, and it's associated with the user.
But, okay, so
Name string.
It will be
name,
name, description, and then we'll have a user.
Yeah, and then this is where you define the relationship in the model.
Right.
then
What you do is, what is the thing that I'm related to? What is the blog related to? Who owns it? Who owns the blog?
The user.
User. So I do user, and this is referencing to the users. So it's just how what they decided. So you do user references. It references the user. Okay. Let's create the post. What do I do? It's going to have a name, description. Let's make that text. What do I do? How do I make that into text or a text area?
Text.
Text.
And then you have a blog reference.
Blog. references. Yeah. And now if you don't get some of these right, you'll just get like 20 error messages. So like you just look at it and you fix it. So you just learn. So it's not the end of the world unless you do something really bad. Then just get a new Mac.
Michael, would it be helpful for us to know what that post.yaml file is, or is that something that we could ignore?
Completely ignore all the things in the test for now.
Okay.
We're going to be using RSpec and Capybara later on.
Okay.
So we're not going to be spending too much time on the default test framework that Rails provides.
Okay.
So just completely ignore it for now.
Okay.
Okay? So now I created these models and I want to update the database because I just made some changes in the database. I need to tell it, hey, update your database. Okay? A lot of times you will forget to tell Rails to do that. So how do I tell Rails, hey, update your database with all the different migrations that I told you to do? Rake, DB. Rake, yeah, you just have to memorize it. Rake, DB, migrate. And it said, it created the users table, took 0.0022 seconds, good job. And then it created the post and the blogs, and it created those for me. Okay, so I am kind of doubting. I don't know if they really did a good job, building the database. How do I check? And how did it no, I didn't even specify what database engine to use. So what happened?
By default, it's SQLite.
By default, it's SQLite.
Just check the tables to see if they exist.
That's correct. Okay, so by default, Rails put this in a SQLite file. So there is an application, and SQLite file. It's just a single file that has the data. So if you need someone to access your database, copy that file, send it over, and they will have access to it. Right? If it is MySQL, what do? You set up like remote user. You put in the IP address. In the cloud server training, you learn how to do that if you have gone through it. Yeah, some of you did, some of you didn't, but it's okay. You can take the course later on, and you will know exactly how to do it. But it's a lot more work. SQLite, just copy the file, drop it in your email, and then it's done. Better way, just use Git or SVN. You don't even have to put in the Dropbox. Okay, so I had this thing called SQLite Database Browser. And I'm going to check the databases to see whether Rails really understood what I told it to do. So I'm going to go to my Rails folder, and I'm going to go to my iBlog. Where do I need to look to get the database file? There are all these files, like so many.
Might be in DB.
Might be DB because, yeah, right there. And there is a development SQLite. Okay. Browse data. Crap, that doesn't look like the users, but that's because it's looking at schema migrations. Forget it. Oh, there's the users. Look at that. ID, name, description, birthday, created at, updated at. So someone was telling me, Michael, created at, updated at is not proper English. And I'm like, I don't know, but that's how Rails does it. So we use created at. Someone told me it's like created on. And all this at, on, in totally confused me. But yeah, in Rails is created at. So I guess created at is supposed to be like location, right?
Or time.
Yeah.
Really? So what is created on? Is it on?
That's date.
But I think created at is like referring to the timestamp, so it makes sense.
Time and space are all.
At.
So if it is like a date,
And
you do
time.
created on.
Yeah, I'll see you on Thursday.
But if it is like date and the time, you say created at.
It depends on how close
I'll
the
see you
black
at 5.
hole. If
Yeah.
it's
This is all
time,
This is all part of space-time.
What the
Are you
heck?
guys talking about just regular English or like coding?
No, real
like-
English.
Yeah, and what Miles said was like most appropriate, I think. When you
Coding
say,
the
when you're
process
talking to
is
people,
created at
create,
when
you
you
know,
I'll see you on
I'll see
Thursday.
you on this date, I'll see you at 2 o'clock.
But it makes sense in Rails because of the timestamp. Has all
Yeah,
the
yeah,
things.
but we're talking about English.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Not like
Created at would be physical location.
physical location created on its date. Okay. So again, Yeah, Japanese guy created. At least he got most of it, really good. For me, it makes sense. Created that. Oh yeah, okay. All right, okay.
In Janglish, though.
Yeah, so blogs is Django like created on?
No, Janglish is Japanese.
Janglish. Okay. I thought you said Django. Okay. All right. If you decide to create your own framework, just stick with created at because programmers are used to it. Okay. So users has that. Notice that it automatically created the ID and the created at, updated at, and it has the post. Okay. All right. So it worked. Now I'm going to do Rails console. All right, so some quizzes for you. How do I create a new user? User dot new, like this.
Oh, probably
You won't have a way of referencing it later.
I need to do capital. Why? Because that's the name of the class. I do a new method, and then it returned the user. Did it save it in the database?
No, it did not.
It didn't. So what do I have to do? Create it and then save it. And then it inserted into the user, it converted that into a SQL query, right? Insert into users, blah, blah, blah. And it committed transaction and said it worked. How do I do it so that I don't create a new one and save it? I just want to create it. What the heck? Yeah, take out the new and save and just do user.create. Creates a new one and saves it.
Oh, so that's just one step.
Got it. Okay, and I did explain this yesterday, but there's so many things that I think it just requires repetition. And once you hear it over and over again, you will feel more comfortable. Okay, it created it. How do I create some new blogs?
Blog.create.
Create. Yeah, okay, it created it. I'm going to create several blogs. Okay, how do I create some new post? Create. And I just keep creating it, and it's awesome. But what the heck? It's just a bunch of nil. I want something more than just nil. How do I do that? How do I add some validations?
Go to your model.
It's if I look into the database, I'm looking at the browse data, looking at the users. Oh, great! I got some new users. Created and updated is all valid, but it's just blank. So I'm going to create a new tab. And here, I'm going to go to the Rails, log, Sublime. Okay. So what do I do? I'm going to go open up my models. I'm going to open up my models here. Okay, so for the blog, I want to make the name required. What do I do? I want to make the name required.
Validate equals arrow sign.
Validates. And it doesn't matter if you get this wrong. If you do validate, it's just not going to run. And it will give you 20 error messages. Just go fix it, and you'll be gone. Or look up, just Google it. Okay, validates. Name. Presence. True. I don't know why anyone would do presence false. So maybe later in Rails, they will just say, I don't know. Okay, let's make the post, name and the description for the post required. What do I do? Post, I go here, and I say, validates, name, and the description, presence. Hold on. Export finished, yes. Now I have to upload it to YouTube. Okay, don't save. Alright, so description, presence is true. Again, as you do assignments, you will be doing this over and over. I think there are about 15 applications, many applications that you will be building in Rails. So you'll just do it over and over, that's the only way, and then you will just think and breathe Ruby. And probably then you will be confused with PHP.
Yeah.
And then you do Python again, you'll be like, okay, now I'm totally lost. That's okay.
So a quick question about attribute accessible. What
So
does that
these
mean?
attributes accessible basically means for my resource, make these things accessible for me to update. So I can do like blog.description, blog.name. It's part of the attributes for that model that I can access.
And earlier, because you did, when you created the blog and you said user references, so it created the belongs to.
Exactly.
Okay.
Okay. All right. So and then for the user, let's make the name required. How do I do that?
Present equals true.
Okay. All right. So I did that. Now I'm back into my console. Okay. And I do user.new. What would happen?
It will instantiate the user object.
It will still be nil.
But it would give you.
It would be nil. And what would happen if I save this?
You get an error
You'll
saying
get an error.
required.
Things are false. What?
What happened? I love
Did you read?
Yeah.
You need to exit.
Yeah,
Oh,
exactly.
console.
So JT is right. So can you explain again why didn't this
When
work?
Rails load, it reads from disk all your configuration settings, and then those settings are now stored in memory, and the Rails server is active in memory. If you make changes to files and configurations on disk, Rails still has the old copy in memory. When you type Rails reload, it will read all of the different Rails files and configurations and then store them in memory so the
Yeah.
sides are synced. Right now you have asynchronous configurations in memory and disk.
Exactly. So what do I have to type here to reload?
Great.
Reload.
Just reload.
reload.
Exclamation mark.
Oh.
Reloading, true. It worked. So now if I go and do user.new save, what would happen?
Validation errors.
Rollback transaction false. Uh-oh. It was about to commit and then like roll back like yeah.
Oh, and then you.
What the
can
heck
do that.
happened?
It encountered some errors. So
Yeah, so how do I retrieve the errors?
Got an error message.
User.errors.
User.errors?
You didn't give
No.
that user a name
You need to
No.
save the variable first. And then
When I do user.new.save, what does that return? I wanted to return an instance of itself so that I can keep calling methods associated with that instance. See why like we don't introduce Ruby until you like do OOP? Because once you do OOP, things like this will make a lot more sense. Okay? It's not magic. It's just methods. Okay? So now I do errors. There's also another called, because errors returns more than just the messages. So there's also a method called full messages. And if I do that, it says name can be blank. Right? All right, let's try to create some empty posts. So I do post, create, errors. I usually like to do error messages. Name can be blank, description can be blank. It already validated. So you can just kind of imagine when I set up my controller and the view, what would I do? I would basically pass that full messages, for loop, display. That's it, right? All right. Wasn't that cool? Like I added no if and else statements. It just added all those things for me, right? Okay. So now let's do a few exercises. Let's make. Oh, so I want to introduce another validation. So for the blog name. So with validations, you can imagine like, let's say you created 3 different helpers or methods to help with some of the major validations that you have to do, like require the presence or the length. And then someone goes, oh, Ruby, or Rails community, I needed to do this validation. Why don't you create another method? So they did, and they keep creating it over, and they create all these different validation methods that you may ever need to use. And then what do they do when they put up the documentation? Documentation is supposed to have everything, right? So they're going to go and put all these things that that are part of the validation functions. So that's why when you're looking at when we give you a link to the documentation, have that in mind. It's not everything that you need to know. Skim through it, like, oh, okay, when I need this, I'll come and use it. Just know where it is, but don't spend time like reading every single thing, right? Because you're not going to need it, right? Okay, and if you need something, you can just create your own method, okay? But there is one that I like, which is requiring the length, okay? So if I want the blog name to have certain length, what I would do is you do this. So I pass the length, and I pass a hash, okay? You've done Ruby, you know the hash, right? And then there is fill called maximum. So maximum, well, let's start with minimum. Minimum length, I want it to be 5, and the maximum, I want it to be 20. So I save it, okay? I come back to my console, I reload it because I just made the change, and let's try to create a new blog where the name is less than 5. So I do blog. How do I do that? How do I create a blog with a name that's like AAA?
Blog create. Colon name. Is it name?
Arrow.
Equal arrow.
AAA or
Quote.
AAA.
Okay. And I wanted to return the error still.
Dot errors. Dot full messages.
Name is too short. Minimum is 5 characters. Good job.
Yes.
Okay. So the validations work. Okay. All right. So let's actually create some real blogs. Okay. It did it. I created a blog 1. All right. So now let's take it a step further. And what I want to do is I want to define some of the relationship. So a blog, a user has many blogs. So I'm going to define the relationship because I want to be able to say the things that we talked about, like say user.blogs, and it will display all of the blogs. Okay, so I need to define that user has many blogs. Blog belongs to user. Okay, but blog also has many posts. Okay, and post belongs to blog. Okay, so I define the relationship and I reload it. Okay, let's start with a clean sheet. So let's delete everything that we have. Let's delete all of the records that we have. So how do I delete all the users? User records?
User. Destroy all.
Destroy all. And it did it all. Okay, and let's destroy the blog. And now let's destroy the post. Okay. So everything is gone. How do I check if it is all gone?
You can
Go to your
user all.
User all. That's empty. Blog all. Empty. Post all. It's empty. So we're basically creating all these different like languages or methods just to make it easier for us to do the SQL query. But it's all converting it to SQL query, right? All right. So now let's create 3 users. So user create, and we'll say name. Let's say is Michael. Okay, it committed it. Let's say John, Charles, and Michelle. Okay, I do user.all, and it displays all of that stuff. Okay, all right, let's create. Okay, so I'm gonna see when I shouldn't introduce too much. Okay, all right. So for the first user, I want to create a blog. How would I do that? This is what you do. I haven't taught you yet, so I'm just going to do it. So for the first user, user.first. Okay. And this is supposed to have blogs, right? And if I do user.firstBlogs, it's supposed to display all of the blogs that the first user has. And it says right now it is 0. But I want to add a new blog. What do I do? Okay, I have to look at my notes just to make sure I don't confuse you guys. Notes. Okay, let's just wing it. Okay, blogs, create. And for the blog, I want to put the name blog1 owned by the first user, and then description. Hi. Okay, and it commit transaction. Notice that it added the blog
User ID 4.
in user ID 4.
Oh, you kept auto incrementing.
So if I do blog.all, okay, it actually didn't commit. Let's do errors. Full messages. Oh, name is too long. Maximum is 20 characters. Oh, what? That's what I told it to do. All right, so blog1 owned by the first user. Too long.
Too many restrictions.
And name is too long. What? That's
20
not
characters is a lot.
That doesn't seem like 20. That's not 20. Is it? Yeah, okay.
Give 21
It's
characters.
exactly 20.
Okay. So this should work. All right, it worked. Okay, so I can do blog all. And notice that it created a blog. It automatically got the user ID and did it, right? Look at the syntax again. User.first blogs create. Let's create another one. So we'll say blog2 owned by user1. Okay? I didn't have to do where, the user ID is that, because how did it know? I said user first, so it already got it from the relationship. Okay? All right. So I'm going to throw some curveballs here. Okay, so again, I want to create several blogs for the last user. What do I do?
Find the last user.
User?
Last.
Last?
Blog.
Create.
Create blog.
Blogs.
Create blogs. Blogs create.
Alright, sorry. And
You
say
pass
several?
multiple hashes in there, like of data.
Yeah, that's part of the assignment. You will know how to do a lot of these. Again, there are a lot of different things you can do. Yeah, trying to cover some basics. So user allows blogs create and name blog. Awesome, awesome. I don't think we made the description required, right? Okay, yeah, there were no errors. It worked. So there should be several. Yeah, it's kind of hard to read, right? Okay, so this is really hard to read. I want to get, I'm doing like multiple things. I want to get all the blogs, but I only want to select the name and the user ID. What would I do? So you just do like select. So instead of displaying everything, I want to display name and
ID.
user ID. Okay, well that didn't work. User. Okay, let's just do one. Okay. I think.
Display data, do multiple slots, right?
Yeah, I'll have to look up the documentation if you want to do multiple. So if you want to get the name, so it created several blogs that are awesome. Okay, so get me all of the blogs owned by the last user. What would I do?
User last blogs on.
Blog dot
User last blogs on.
user dot loss
Blogs on.
blogs That's it, just blocks. Okay, gives me all of those. Okay, and then now if I do B, it's already updated, right? But I need to save it to the database. So I do b.save. Okay? And then